Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Glad you could join us.
Hey everyone. So, have you seen the news lately? It's kind of wild. More Taiwanese people are ending up on China's wanted lists.
Yeah, I saw that. And it's not just the usual suspects, right? We're not talking mob bosses or, big-time scammers.
No, not at all. Get this. We're talking scholars, journalists, activists. I even saw a YouTuber on the list.
Okay, that's where I get confused. I mean, can law actually be used like that? It feels less like jurisprudence and more like a political weapon,
You basically hit the nail on the head. The CCP's wanted list, it's pretty much become a political tool now.
Yeah.
Say something they don't like, something that doesn't fit their narrative.
And boom, you get slapped with a label like subverting state power or splitting the country.
Exactly. Serious charges. But here's the million-dollar question, right?
The big question being, can they actually catch anyone this way? I mean, do these laws, these warrants, have any real teeth outside of China? Or is this whole thing just psychological warfare dressed up in legal language aimed at everyone in Taiwan?
That's what we're going to break down today. We're digging into what these, let's call them absurd laws targeting Taiwanese people are really doing.
Yeah, do they hold any water internationally? Is there any legitimacy there?
And how real is the threat, the sort of imaginary warrant idea? How much should it actually worry people about their freedom?
So today on Sip and Talk, we'll help you understand what the CCP has done in the past, what they seem to be doing now, how Taiwan's reacting, and honestly, why we should all probably care about this stuff.
Plus, we got to do it. Everyone's favorite thought experiment.
Oh yeah, what's that?
What if Taiwan turned the tables and issued an arrest warrant for, say, Xi Jinping?
Okay, all right. Let's jump into it. This should be interesting.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. This isn't just happening occasionally, right? There's a clear trend here, especially recently.
Oh, absolutely. The data, particularly since 2024, shows a really significant jump. It's not a trickle. It feels more like the floodgates have opened a bit.
So what are the numbers telling us? How bad is it?
Well, the information we have points to at least 71 Taiwanese individuals reported missing, detained, or, seriously questioned after traveling to China, or even just passing through places like Hong Kong or Macau. This is just since January 2024.
71 people in less than 2 years. That's...
Wow.
And questioned or detained.
And out of that group, at least 15 are confirmed to have been formally detained for trial. So it's not just quick questioning. It's leading to serious legal processes for some.
That's staggering. And it really highlights the mechanism, doesn't it? It often happens during what seems like normal travel tourism, family visits, business trips. The core issue, the mechanism that makes this possible, is simple but honestly devastating. Beijing just unilaterally decides that Taiwanese citizens are Chinese citizens, full stop.
So the moment someone with a Taiwanese passport crosses into mainland China or Hong Kong or Macau,
they're instantly operating under a different set of rules. Forget typical international due process for foreign nationals. Their own government back in Taipei. They have almost no ability to step in, provide consular help, ensure fair legal treatment.
Because from Beijing's perspective, it's not arresting a foreigner.
Right. It's detaining one of their own citizens who they claim has broken their laws. It's framed entirely as an internal matter.
Okay, let's talk about who they're targeting with these high-profile splittist labels. It feels like they're picking specific people to make examples out of, doesn't it? To send a message.
Absolutely. It seems very calculated to create the maximum chilling effect across different parts of Taiwanese society. Take Shen Po-Yang, for instance. He's a well-known academic, also a legislator now. In October 2025, the Public Security Bureau in Chongqing announced a formal investigation into him. That usually signals an arrest warrant is coming, maybe even a trial in absentia.
And the charge against him. This is where it gets, kind of surreal.
Yeah, get this. Establishing the Black Bear Academy.
The Black Bear Academy. For people who haven't heard of it, what is that exactly? It sounds intense.
It sounds dramatic, but it's basically a civil defense organization. They teach ordinary Taiwanese civilians practical skills, emergency first aid, how to deal with disasters, recognizing disinformation online, things like that. It's about resilience.
So community preparedness, helping your neighbors in a crisis, that kind of thing.
Pretty much. But from Beijing's perspective, any effort that strengthens Taiwan's sense of identity or its ability to defend itself, even in a civilian context, gets framed as splitting the country.
So they labeled him a stubborn Taiwan independence element for teaching first aid.
Essentially, yeah. That's the level of absurdity we're dealing with. Any act that promotes Taiwanese self-reliance can be twisted into separatism.
Wow. And how did he react to being put on a wanted list, potentially facing serious charges?
His public response was, honestly, perfect counter-psychology. He basically said, Taiwanese people aren't afraid. He just refused to play their game, refused to be intimidated.
Good for him. But look, this isn't just theoretical, right? People are actually serving serious prison time over this stuff.
That's the harsh reality check. Yang Chiwan, he's the vice chairman of the Taiwan Independence Party. He was sentenced back in September 2024.
How long did he get?
9 years. 9 years in prison for splitism. And his conviction was a landmark case, the first time a Taiwanese person was actually convicted on that specific charge.
And the timing. Wasn't that right after Nancy Pelosi's visit in 2022 when tensions were super high?
Exactly. It happened shortly after that visit. It clearly shows a political motivation, right? Using the legal system to punish dissent during a period of heightened geopolitical tension.
And it's not just politicians or activists. It's hitting people involved in, like, free expression, too. Publishers, authors.
Definitely. Look at the case of Fu Cha. He's the editor of Baki Publishing. He was detained back in 2023, just visiting family in Shanghai.
And what happened to him?
He was sentenced in February 2025. Got 3 years for incitement to separatism.
Incitement. What was his actual crime?
Publishing books. Books critical of the CCP, covering sensitive topics like, the situation in Xinjiang, or discussing democracy movements.
That's publishing ideas.
Exactly. Publishing ideas they don't like. His case sends a really powerful, chilling message to the entire publishing world in Taiwan and Hong Kong. It shows Beijing is targeting the whole ecosystem of free thought, not just the activists shouting on the streets.
That's a crucial point. The net seems to be getting wider and wider. It's not just the obvious political figures anymore.
It really is expanding. It feels like they're just casting a huge dragnet sometimes. Consider the Taiwanese YouTuber known as Anu. He also got hit with a warrant in October 2025.
A YouTuber.
Yeah.
What was he accused of?
The charge was fabricating false information and promoting splitist fallacy. But here's the twist, the part that tells you everything.
Okay.
Anu was actually seen by many as being relatively deep blue, generally more sympathetic towards China, often discussed mainland affairs, maybe favored closer ties.
Wait, really? So even someone who wasn't overtly anti-CCP got targeted?
Yeah. And that just blows up the whole idea of loyalty, doesn't it? If someone generally seen as leaning pro-China can still be targeted because maybe something they said or the timing of it didn't quite align with the party line at that exact moment,
Right.
then loyalty isn't about your overall stance. It's about absolute moment-to-moment obedience. It proves that nothing guarantees safety except maybe total silence. Or maybe not even that.
Precisely. It's loyalty to the party, not the nation, and it's demanded constantly. And this expansion isn't just about individuals speaking out, it's reaching into cyberspace too.
In June 2025, police in Guangzhou actually issued a public reward, RMB 40,000, which is about $5,500 US, for information leading to the arrest of 20 named individuals.
40,000 RMB. Not a fortune. But putting names out there publicly is the point, right? Naming and shaming. Who were these people?
They were accused of being part of something called Cyber Warfare Unit 20, supposedly working with Taiwan's military cyber teams and conducting illegal network attacks.
Okay, that sounds serious. Was there proof?
Well, here's the thing. Reports suggest many names were scraped from old public Facebook data. Some were apparently former military personnel, possibly retired. Taiwan's government immediately shot back, calling the accusations political smears based on outdated, publicly available info, basically using old social media profiles to build a conspiracy.
Man. And it doesn't stop there, right? We've seen this creep into other areas too. Religion, business.
No area seems immune. In 2024 and 2025, there were arrests of members of religious groups like Yiquan Tao or the Unification Church.
What were the charges?
Often vague things like organizing cults or violating laws, even when the groups insist they're just involved in peaceful religious practice. Taiwan calls it a blatant violation of religious freedom, basically targeting any kind of independent community organizing.
And then there's the commercial pressure. Taiwanese businesses have huge operations on the mainland. The threat of arrest must hang over them.
Definitely. Look at the Foxconn case in October 2024. 4 employees arrested in Zhengzhou. The official charge was breach of trust, something commercial.
Okay, so maybe just a business dispute.
Maybe, but the Taiwanese government described the whole situation as strange. That strongly implies they saw it as politically motivated, or at least using a commercial dispute as leverage for political or economic pressure.
Yeah, when businesses feel their staff can just be picked up arbitrarily, that's a huge lever for Beijing to pull, isn't it?
Yeah.
For political influence.
Absolutely. And finally, we can't talk about this without mentioning the case that really set the stage for all this, the historical precedent.
You mean Li Mingche?
Exactly. Li Mingche's conviction back in 2017 was the watershed moment. He got 5 years for subversion of state power.
And what did he actually do?
He shared information online about Taiwan's democracy, about human rights, just sharing ideas from Taiwan with people in China via the internet.
And that got him 5 years for subversion.
He was the first Taiwanese citizen sentenced under that specific charge. His case was the signal flare. It showed Beijing was fully prepared to use its internal security laws to prosecute democratic speech that happened entirely outside mainland China. That was really the opening salvo in this whole legal warfare strategy against Taiwanese citizens.
Okay, so we've seen the kinds of people getting caught in this net.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom out a bit. We need to understand the actual legal tools the CCP is using here. Where does the absurdity really come into play? You mentioned this label, stubborn.
Right, the stubborn label. It's not just name-calling. It's a key part of their strategy. Think of it like a classification system designed to divide and conquer the Taiwanese population.
How does that work? What are the levels?
Okay, so at the base level, you've got the general term Taiwan independence element. This is super broad. Basically, it can apply to almost anyone in Taiwan who doesn't buy into Beijing's one China principle.
Which, let's be honest, given public opinion polls in Taiwan, is a lot of people.
A huge percentage, exactly. But then they create this next level, the stubborn Taiwan independence element. These are the specific individuals who get publicly named and sanctioned. This started formally around 2021, 2022.
So these are the ones marked as like the worst offenders, the irredeemable enemies.
That's exactly the function. They're labeled as irredeemable. These are the people targeted for the harshest penalties, asset freezes, travel bans for them and their families, and of course, criminal prosecution, even with the death penalty mentioned.
Wow.
And this distinction is crucial for their political division strategy. By making a big share of punishing the few stubborn ones, they aim to scare the pants off the much larger group, the implicitly non-stubborn majority.
The ones they still hope to maybe win over or at least neutralize?
Right. The message is basically, look what happens to them. You don't want that, do you? So just keep your head down, don't cause trouble, don't support these stubborn elements, and maybe you'll be okay. It's classic divide and rule using legal threats.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are the actual legal weapons they're pulling out of this toolkit? It started way back, didn't it?
Yeah, the foundation for a lot of this was laid with the anti-secession law back in 2005.
Right, I remember that one.
That law basically says Taiwan is part of China, period. And most importantly, it authorizes China to use non-peaceful means, meaning military force, if they decide that the possibility of peaceful unification is completely gone.
Which is absurd on its face, right? It's an attempt to create a domestic legal justification for what would be an act of international aggression, deciding unilaterally when peace has failed.
Exactly. It's trying to frame a potential invasion as somehow legally sanctioned by their own internal laws. It's legal pretext for military action, aimed mostly at an international audience, trying to muddy the waters.
But the more recent stuff, the things driving these current warrants and threats against people like Shen Po-Yang, that comes from something newer.
Yeah, the really sharp edge right now comes from the guidelines on punishing diehard Taiwan independent separatists for splitting the country and inciting secession crimes. Catchy name, right? Often called the 22 Articles, issued in June 2024.
Okay, 22 articles. Why June 2024? What was going on then?
Well, think about the timing. That was shortly after the inauguration of Taiwan's current president, Lai Ching-te, whom Beijing absolutely views as a hardcore separatist. These articles were a direct, almost immediate legal shot across the bow.
Like a welcome present from Beijing.
Pretty much. A way to immediately raise the legal and political temperature, trying to criminalize the new administration's platform right from day one.
And what makes these 22 articles so particularly alarming from like a human rights angle?
Two things really stand out, and they're shocking. First, they explicitly allow for the death penalty for ringleaders or those involved in what they deem particularly serious cases of separatism.
The death penalty. For political speech conducted outside their territory.
Yeah. Sentencing someone to death for their political views expressed in a different country, that's just a massive violation of basic due process and international human rights norms. It's staggering.
It's like judicial theater, but with potentially lethal consequences down the line. What's the second scary part?
The second part is the explicit green light for trials in absentia, holding a trial and reaching a verdict, even if the defendant isn't there.
Okay. Trials in absentia happen sometimes in democratic countries too, right? If someone skips bail.
Right, but usually under very specific, limited circumstances, like when a defendant actively flees to avoid justice.
Right.
Here, China is applying it systematically to political opponents living freely in another democratic country, people who were never under their jurisdiction to begin with.
So let's game this out. Say they hold a trial in absentia for Shen Po-yang and sentence him to death or life in prison. What does that actually do?
It means the whole process is about deterrence and political messaging, not actual justice. They gather evidence, public statements, articles he wrote, maybe testimony from others, hold a closed trial, issue the sentence, and then broadcast it.
And the person themselves has no say, no defense.
None. The goal isn't to execute the sentence right then. They can't, unless he travels there. The goal is to officially brand him a criminal, justify freezing any assets they can find, and make him a fugitive for life in their eyes. The threat becomes the punishment.
Got it. Then there's the older, maybe broader legal tool they use, Article 105, subversion of state power. That's the one they used against Li Mingche, right?
Exactly. It replaced the old counter-revolutionary crime from the Mao era. What makes Article 105 so useful for them and so absurdly dangerous for others is how incredibly broad it is.
How broad?
So broad that almost any activity they dislike can be squeezed into it. Criticizing the government online, sharing information about democracy, organizing peaceful advocacy groups, even something like the Black Bear Academy teaching civil defense, it can all be twisted into incitement to subversion.
So it basically turns political dissent, even mild dissent, into a serious crime, punishable by long prison sentences.
And it's easy for them to prosecute, in a way. All the evidence is often just public stuff, social media posts, published articles, speeches someone gave. They don't need spies or complicated investigations. The only thing missing is the actual person in the courtroom.
Which brings us to the core conflict here. This clash over legitimacy and this idea of long-arm jurisdiction. How does the CCP even try to justify this to the rest of the world?
Their argument is simple, consistent, and from their perspective, unshakable. Taiwan is part of China. End of story.
So
Therefore, prosecuting crimes against the Chinese state like separatism or subversion, which they define themselves as their sovereign right, they tell the world this is an internal security matter, but out. It's none of your business.
But the democratic world, Taiwan itself, the U.S., Europe, others, completely rejects that framing.
Completely. They see it as illegal long-arm jurisdiction. Taiwan is viewed as a separate, self-governing democracy. So the CCP's domestic laws simply don't apply to Taiwanese citizens or their political speech, especially when it happens outside of China's control.
Is there ever a legitimate use of long-arm jurisdiction?
Sure. Democratic countries use it too, but usually for things like major financial crimes, international terrorism, drug trafficking stuff where the crime clearly crosses borders and affects multiple countries. What China's doing is different. They're targeting political opinions and democratic activities. That's a red line for most democracies.
And then there are the procedural issues. Even if someone is detained, the process itself seems to violate basic rights.
Oh, absolutely. The lack of transparency is a huge one. Taiwanese authorities usually can't visit their detained citizens. Access to independent lawyers is heavily restricted or denied. And there are consistent reports of pressure, isolation, and even forced confessions.
Like in the Li Mingche case, his family had trouble contacting him. The trial wasn't public.
Exactly. That complete lack of fairness and due process is why the international community often views these cases not just as legal overreach, but as potential arbitrary detention or even a form of hostage diplomacy, using individuals as pawns for political leverage.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and give people listening a clear reality check. We've established this legal threat is serious, it's politically charged, it's kind of absurd in its reach.
Yeah.
But how real is the danger on a day-to-day basis for the average person in Taiwan? Is it constant or very conditional?
That's probably the single most important distinction we need to make here, the actual physical power of these laws. It stops dead at the border, meaning if you're a Taiwanese citizen sitting in your apartment in Taipei, maybe posting something critical of the CCP on Facebook, and you're not already a high-profile targeted individual, what's the immediate physical risk to you right now?
Yeah.
It's practically zero, as long as you don't go there.
Yeah.
The CCP's legal system, its police, its courts, they have near total enforcement power, but only within the territory they control. Mainland China, Hong Kong, and Macau.
But the moment you step across that line,
the danger becomes immediate and potentially absolute. If you're someone they've targeted or even someone with a job or background they deem sensitive, and you decide to travel there for business, tourism, or even just a flight layover, that's when you're vulnerable to arrest, detention, trial.
So the biggest, most concrete threat is really a travel risk. Booking that trip, connecting through Hong Kong. That's the action that puts you under their thumb.
Exactly. And that's why the data on travelers getting stopped is so telling. Those 188 reports of people being restricted, detained, or going missing between January and August 2024, it shows there's an active filtering system at work.
They're checking names at customs, at immigration.
Yeah, they seem to be actively cross-referencing travelers against their lists, the known targets, maybe people with certain political affiliations, former military activists. It's a real-time screening process at entry points. The danger upon arrival is very real for some.
Okay, but what about trying to extend that reach globally? Like Shen Po-yang, the academic with the Black Bear Academy, he's officially wanted now. What happens if he flies to, say, Paris or New York?
That's where the CCP's power becomes almost entirely, well, imaginary, frankly. Democratic countries simply do not cooperate with China on enforcing these kinds of politically motivated warrants.
Why not?
Because their own legal systems are based on the rule of law, human rights protections, and due process. They don't recognize China's claim to jurisdiction over Taiwanese citizens for expressing political views in Taiwan. They won't extradite someone for splitism or subversion. It just won't happen.
What about Interpol? Can't China issue an Interpol red notice for these people? That sounds serious.
They can try, and they certainly do issue red notices. But Interpol has rules they're supposed to prevent notices being used for primarily political, military, racial, or religious reasons.
Those do.
Right. China sometimes manages to get politically motivated notices issued, maybe by framing them cleverly. But democratic member countries usually review these notices, recognize their political nature, and refuse to act on them.
So it might cause a hassle at an airport somewhere.
Exactly. We hear anecdotes. Maybe someone gets briefly stopped or questioned at border control in Germany or somewhere because their name pinged an alert. But it usually gets sorted out quickly. It's a major inconvenience, potentially scary for a moment, but it almost never leads to actual arrest or extradition based on these political charges from China.
Okay, so if the actual power to arrest and prosecute is so geographically limited, then the real purpose of this whole elaborate legal campaign must be something else entirely. You called it governing by imagination.
That's the concept, yeah. It seems the CCP is relying more on the fear of the law than the actual execution of the law. They don't need to catch everyone on their list.
They just need to catch a few visible ones.
Exactly. Catch a few prominent people like Yang Chi-yuan, the party VP, or Fu Cha, the publisher, make a big public show of it, sentence them harshly.
And that sends a ripple of fear through the entire population back in Taiwan.
Precisely. It encourages widespread, preemptive self-censorship. People start thinking twice before they speak out, before they join an organization, before they publish something sensitive, before they even travel.
And from Beijing's perspective, this is a pretty smart strategy, isn't it? Low cost, potentially high impact.
Extremely cost-effective for them. Think about it. Threaten the death penalty, throw around terms like stubborn element, freeze some assets. It costs them very little politically or financially compared to, say, a military blockade.
But it generates enormous fear and anxiety.
Exactly. It coerces millions of ordinary Taiwanese citizens, especially academics, journalists, business people, who need to travel or interact with the mainland into policing themselves. They avoid sensitive topics. They distance themselves from certain people or groups, all to protect their own safety or livelihood.
So Beijing achieves key political goals, silencing critics, isolating opposition movements, promoting self-censorship without firing a shot, or facing major international sanctions.
That seems to be the calculation. It's a powerful form of psychological and political control disguised as legal procedure.
Can you give an example of how this self-censorship actually plays out? How does this fear change behavior?
You see it in subtle ways. Maybe a Taiwanese academic who gets funding from mainland sources suddenly chooses less sensitive research topics. Or they avoid conferences where stubborn elements might be speaking.
Or in publishing.
Yeah, maybe an author tones down certain passages in a book, or a publisher decides a manuscript is just too risky to take on, not because it's bad, but because it might anger Beijing and jeopardize their other business. The fear shapes what gets said, what gets researched, what gets published, even miles away from China's shores. The law is casting a long shadow, even if it can't physically reach most people.
Okay, so if this is what China's doing, this low-cost, high-impact psychological game using legal threats, How is Taiwan actually fighting back? What's their strategy against this constant pressure?
Well, Taiwan's response has to operate on a couple of levels. On one hand, you have the official public condemnation.
Right, the government statements.
Exactly. The Mainland Affairs Council, the embassy, and other government bodies consistently and strongly condemn these actions. They state very clearly that China has zero jurisdiction over Taiwan or its citizens. They frame it correctly as an illegal overreach, an attack on sovereignty.
But statements only go so far. What are they doing practically to protect people from, accidentally walking into a trap?
The main practical defense is information and urging extreme caution. The government issues frequent, sometimes very specific, travel warnings.
Like, hey, if you've ever criticized the CCP online, maybe don't transit through Hong Kong.
Pretty much. They urge citizens, especially those with known political views, past military service, certain religious affiliations, or sensitive business ties, to really think hard before visiting China, Hong Kong, or Macau. They encourage people to register their travel plans with the government.
So they're basically saying, we stand by your rights, we condemn China's actions, but realistically, we can't pull you out if you cross that line and they decide to grab you.
That's the tough reality they have to convey. And they also view these legal threats in a broader context, right?
So?
They see these arrests and blacklists not just as isolated incidents, but as part of the CCP's larger united front work and infiltration efforts, attempts to sow division, intimidate critics, and ultimately undermine Taiwan's democratic resilience from within.
Which probably leads to them strengthening their own counterintelligence and national security laws domestically.
Exactly. Seeing these external legal threats reinforces the need to protect against internal subversion and undue influence. It's all connected in their view.
Okay, now for the part everyone's probably been waiting for. The speculative, maybe slightly cathartic thought experiment. The eye for an eye scenario.
Yes, the ultimate what if. The idea is, since China is using its laws to criminalize Taiwan's leaders and citizens for separatism, could Taiwan flip the script?
Could Taiwan pass its own law? Maybe a crime of attempted annexation or something, and issue international arrest warrants for top CCP officials, maybe even Xi Jinping himself.
Okay, let's break that down. Could Taiwan's legal system theoretically do that?
Yeah, legally speaking, is it possible?
Well, Taiwan is a sovereign democracy with its own independent judiciary. Its courts could theoretically investigate actions deemed hostile or criminal under Taiwanese law, even if committed by foreign leaders. They could argue attempted annexation violates their constitution or national security laws. So, on paper, within their own legal system, maybe it's legally conceivable.
Okay, so it's possible, if maybe a stretch. What would be the point? What's the symbolic power?
Oh, the symbolic power would be immense. It would be a huge political statement on the world stage. It directly counters China's narrative, asserts Taiwan's sovereignty in a very bold way, and puts Beijing on the defensive, having to react to their leader being branded a wanted criminal by a democracy. It reframes the conflict, painting the CCP as the aggressor under the rule of law.
Okay, that sounds pretty powerful symbolically. But then there's the reality check. Could Taiwan actually enforce such a warrant?
Zero chance. Absolutely zero. Just like democratic countries ignore China's political warrants, the vast majority of the world would ignore Taiwan's warrant for Xi Jinping due to the massive geopolitical implications.
No country is going to arrest the leader of China based on a warrant from Taipei.
Not going to happen. And more importantly, think about the consequences. Such a move would be seen by Beijing as an extreme provocation. A massive escalation.
They'd likely interpret it as a definitive step towards formal legal independence.
Almost certainly. It could give them the very pretext they might be looking for to justify much harsher actions, severe economic coercion, military escalation, maybe even worse than what followed the Pelosi visit. It would pour gasoline on the fire.
So while it might feel good in the moment, strategically, it could be disastrous for Taiwan.
Exactly. It would likely backfire spectacularly. And this brings us back to a really fundamental point about democratic resilience.
Which is?
Which is that Taiwan's greatest strength, its key advantage over the CCP, is its commitment to democratic values, transparency, and the actual rule of law, not just using law as a political weapon.
So mimicking China's tactics, even in retaliation, would undermine the very thing that makes Taiwan different and gives it the moral high ground.
Precisely. The moment Taiwan starts playing the same game, issuing symbolic warrants with no hope of enforcement just to score political points, it weakens its own democratic standing. Resisting that temptation, sticking to principle even when provoked, that's the real strategic strength. It's choosing to be better. So wrapping things up for today's Sip and Talk, Let's just crystallize the main takeaway for you listening.
Yeah, what we've really broken down is how the CCP is using its legal system not primarily for justice in these cases, but as a tool, a sophisticated, pretty low-cost tool for psychological control, for targeted pressure, designed mostly to create fear and uncertainty.
It's definitely not a globally recognized or legitimate judicial process when applied this way. We have to stress again, the actual physical danger is almost entirely confined to stepping foot inside mainland China, Hong Kong, or Macau, especially if you're on their radar.
Right. Outside of that specific travel risk, the main goal of these blacklists and threats seems to be encouraging widespread self-censorship back in Taiwan. Getting people to quiet down, to avoid certain topics, to basically erode democratic discussion from the inside out.
And that distinction is just so vital, isn't it? When law stops being about justice and becomes just another weapon for crushing political dissent, well, that's a dangerous path. It chips away at the international order.
And maybe the fact that Taiwan, despite the provocation, generally resists the urge to play that same game, maybe that says everything about the difference between a democracy and an authoritarian state. That restraint is strength.
It really is. And these actions serve as a warning, a warning for all democracies about how legal systems can be bent for political aims across borders if it's happening to Taiwan today.
Yeah, who's next? Okay, thank you so much for joining us for this pretty intense Sip and Talk session. As always, our goal is just to lay out the facts, offer some analysis, and hopefully get you thinking critically.
Absolutely. Keep questioning, keep digging deeper into these complex global issues.
And hey, if you enjoyed the discussion, please remember to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, don't miss out. And also check out our old pal Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickey to Life. He's got all sorts of fun stuff, memes, liquor tastings, vlogs from his latest trip around Europe. Good times over there.
Definitely check Mickey out. All right, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.